Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. It's a good thing podcasts are free, as this one isn't worth a penny. Here are your hosts, Damien Fahy and Andy Leeks.
Hello and welcome to episode 105 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fahy and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good, Andy. I am very good. Slightly chilly up here in my loft while I'm recording, but I'm good.
You need to stop being tight and turn on that heating.
Yeah, I know. I'm not being tight. I don't think it is. I think it's a case. Do you know what it is? In a house that has a loft, the heat rises, doesn't it?
Well,
and so
it's meant to.
It's meant to. And when you turn the heating on downstairs because you're cold, by the time you go to bed, the heat's risen up in the house, and it's like a sauna. And so you can't really sleep with all the windows open because you get too cold. So you're in that kind of... You can never get the house equal. I know some people might say you get thermostatic valves on their radiators, but I've got them, and it still makes no difference. You can't control where the heat goes. So you end up you have to go with the room you use the most, like the living room. Keep that warm, and then when you go to bed, you end up having to be freezing cold. Otherwise, you'll be sweltering. So unfortunately, I'm just moaning about the heating in my house, basically.
Well, I can see you've got an extra layer on, so well done you. I've done the same. I'm working from home today, and chucked an extra layer on, and we're all saving money. Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Check your heating bills. That's the money saving thing you should be doing this time of year. True, actually. That's not me just making that up. It is true. Because they all change their tariffs and etc. And all the tariffs with the lock you in for so many winters have obviously long passed. So you should be doing it. There you go. Quick tip at the beginning.
Yeah, apart from being a bit chilly, what have you been up to in the last week? Anything exciting?
My brain feels so muddled and clogged because I've just been so busy with doing everything Money to the Masses related that I don't even know what I've been doing. I don't think I've actually been doing anything in life other than that, which is, I don't know if that's good or bad. So I've not really done anything other than just being full throttle on Money to the Masses, Andy. So please tell me you've done something that I can live my life through you.
Well, I have done something. Yes, I snapped a hamstring.
This is like a regular occurrence for you, Andy.
Yeah, it was the other one this time. So I felt it twang, and waited a few days for the bruising to appear, which it did. And I've got a purple bruise from my bum cheeks down to my knee, which is lovely.
Do you know what? We must be we must have the shortest hamstrings in podcasting history, because I think since we've been doing this podcast, that must be the third time you've done yours, and I've done mine at least once or twice. We just sit in chairs our whole lives, and that is it. And so therefore our legs are almost ceasing to function.
I know how we can stop it happening, for sure. We can actually accept that we're getting old and we shouldn't be playing football and running in dad's races at the school.
I've accepted that now. I've accepted that. I was once told that by a physio who turned around to me years ago when I did my hamstring previously. He just turned around to me and just said, "Damien, the problem really is you're just getting old. Basically, your body's not able to take it anymore." And that was quite a shock, because being quite a young-looking guy, you feel like, well, you're telling me that you're just old inside, and you just better accept it. Which was, it was probably about the same time that I noticed that I was older than every footballer in the calendar of the Tottenham Hotspur football team. Because I used to get a calendar every year of the players, and I realised that I was even older than the eldest player, which is usually the goalkeeper. And then I knew my dream was over, that I was never going to make it as a footballer. Not that I ever was, but that was just really it. Yeah,
it's a strange moment, that, isn't it? Because I've also had that realisation that when I look at the players on the football pitch, and you see there's always one or two more experienced members that they look old and they're a little bit slower. Their reaction speed is a bit slower, and you think, God bless him, he's going to be hanging up his boots and he's looking tired, he's looking old. And then you realise they're 4 years younger than you. Yeah. And then you have that realisation that, bugger, I'm actually quite old, aren't I? It's a weird thing.
Yeah, but I always wonder with footballers, because they generally do look so much older than they are. And I don't know what it is that they seem to... Maybe it's just because the way we hold them up in high regard, and you sort of, when you're younger, you admire them, so they seem older. I don't know. But then you find out they're 28, and you're thinking, blimey, I don't know, in your head. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with money.
Right, moving on. What do we got on this week's pod?
Right, last week was popular. We did a piece on how to get started with investing, and there's going to be a piece on how to boost your investment returns. So it's the holy grail of investing. And I'm going to give people a few tidbits, really, and I just want to show them how I would do it, how you can approach it. Give a bit of insight into how, if you work in the world of investing and you're good at it, this is the kind of things how I would look at a problem. And the other thing is, there's a money hack, probably the best money hack I've ever done or come across. So I'm going to tell people about that. So it's really up to you, Andy, which we do first, because the investing one is going to be the slightly longer piece. It's got a couple of really good nuances in there. Covers a couple of different topics, all to do with timings and managers and all sorts. So you choose. What do you want first, Andy?
Let's do the investment piece. Let's do the meaty piece first, while people are still able to concentrate and sitting up straight and listening, and then we'll do the life hack at the end and keep them interested.
Yeah, and
that sounds like the first bit's boring. It's not, I'm sure.
No, it's not, Andy. But I know what you mean. You're going to tease them. But even if you're not into investing, this will hopefully get you. You'll pick up something and may spark an interest. And if anything else, when you start to, because at some point nearly everybody does invest in something, and they can give them something to consider. So anyway, it's like investing for the long term. How do you boost that investment returns? And it was an interesting idea that came to me really because I've had a couple of conversations with people via the chat window on the 80/20 investor page on our website where you sign up. Just before we came on air, actually, Andy, the one popped up and I was talking to somebody and Andy was screaming, "What's that noise?" And it's like an alarm bell goes off, and I end up talking to them about 80/20 investor. So go on there and talk to me. I know a number of you have actually on the podcast gone on to the 80/20 page. You can access it from the homepage of moneytothemasses.com and then talk to me about investing and all sorts. I was chatting to one guy the other day, really nice bloke. We veered completely off investing, and we were talking about, I think we were just talking about the city and generally and about his career and things like that. So yeah, if you want to talk about anything, I'm quite open to that. But anyway, the idea of investing, boosting your investment returns is how do you do it? Now, there's been research that's been carried out in the past I've seen, and it's normally presented by fund managers and wealth managers, and when I've been to these presentations, and it normally tries to emphasize something they do. And the key things really are timing, asset allocation. So timing is when you buy, so when you go into the market, when market's high or low, and the price you really buy at. The asset allocation is what you buy. It's whether you buy UK stuff, America, bonds, equities. And the what you buy is another key part, which is actually what is the thing you buy. Is it which fund manager, etc. So the key, obviously, to doing well and outperforming everybody else is to maximise that, basically perfect that equation. Now, we touched upon timing before. I taught people how to market time. Do you remember we did a podcast? And go back and listen to it. Brilliant podcast as ever. But the point was, the market timing is one of those things that you shouldn't bother doing. You'll never get it right. And actually, the better thing to do is just invest for a longer term, because the longer you invest for, the initial amount price you buy at, and when you get into the market, has a lesser and lesser impact on your ultimate return that you make at the end.
Yeah.
So that was the key thing. Now, asset allocation, I remember seeing a chart that goes on about asset allocation is key. So that is, if you think about it, every asset has its day. So where there's a market crash, if you were holding cash instead of having shares, you would have been better off. But then in a market where shares are flying, if you're sitting on savings, then you're going to earn nothing, while people who've got shares are making a killing. It's true of property, bonds, currencies, all the various different types of investments. So the idea is you have a good mix, and within those things there's geographical splits, like American equities and funds, and it could be Japanese ones. So you have to have a nice mix. So asset allocation is key, because that helps you ride the ups and downs and stops you being overexposed to any one thing. So it's kind of not putting all your eggs in one basket. Now, I did a podcast on the perfect allocation, asset allocation once, so go back and listen to it. I'm not going to cover that again today. You can Google it on our website. I think there's an article that alludes to it on moneytothemasses.com. And one of the things that I worked out this week. I was doing some work because somebody was asking about what you buy, and I was doing some commentary for 80/20 Investor people. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service that I run, and a guy wrote to me this week and said, do you know what, you don't talk about that enough. I've listened to loads of podcasts and I've only just worked out what your 80/20 Investor service is, and I kind of wish I'd found it earlier. And I suppose you have to realise not everyone listens to our podcasts in order, and I'm going to start doing a bit of a stinger for it in the podcast so people know what it does. But really, I teach people how to run money, and I help them really give them a short list of funds. So it's kind of you go and pick what we talk about, and the ones that our algorithm that is shown to work and perform, and I'll talk about that in a second. They can do that. You can take my expertise for a really low subscription, basically access to those fund shortlists and the research that I do. Now, one of the pieces of research I was looking at this week just highlighted the fact that there have been winners and losers in this market. We're in 2016, so if you're listening to this in 2017, 2018, don't worry, it doesn't make a difference. The point is that after Brexit vote, the referendum, there have been some huge winners and losers. The FTSE's gone up, but there have been things in there that have gone down. So anything that's exposed to the UK, house builders, banks, financials, those sorts of things have done badly because they don't earn money in foreign currencies. So when the pound falls, if you earn in a foreign currency, those earnings, when you bring them back to the UK and change them from dollars into pounds, you've suddenly got a 16% kicker because the pound's fallen 16%. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So the point is, I was talking about the winners and losers of what's been going on in this period of 2016, and actually active fund managers have done pretty badly. They've underperformed, and that isn't unusual. There are periods where they do outperform, and then there are quite often long periods where they underperform. And one of the reasons they underperform, or have done so far this year, is that they held a position, a belief before they went into Brexit that we wouldn't leave the European Union, and they held on to that belief all the way through, and they invested in things that were in the UK. So they earned, so house builders, things like that were exposed to our economy and not external economies, and therefore were all denominated and had earnings in the UK currency. So the point is that they were UK focused, and when Brexit happened, they looked at it and went, well, okay, well, we're going to stick to our principles and our fundamentals and what we believed was true beforehand. And of course, as things have unravelled, and you made a killing if you were globally focused like we were on 80/20. So to give you a good example, in the year to date, so we're in August. No, we're not. What am I talking about? We're in October. We're in October right now. So in those 10 months, not quite 10 months, just over 9 months, 80/20 is up 18.8%. Okay, that's how much money it's made in that very, very short period of time. And that's a lot, given that the average for an equity return over history has been shown to be 5% roughly. So you've got ups and downs, but that's the average. 18% return we're not invested in equities fully. It's only about 60%. The rest is in really safe stuff. Well, the average fund manager with equivalent exposure has made about 12.2%. So they've done okay, but you can see it's a big difference. Given that 6% is over 10 months, you would be thinking that they should be a lot closer. And the reason is because when things have changed, the pound has really knocked the market. It's changed expectations of what companies are going to earn in the future, because if they're overseas exposure, their earnings are going to forecasts have gone up, etc., etc. So it's kind of wobbled the whole outlook for different things in the fundamentals. So if fund managers have stuck with their pre-Brexit world views, they've done badly relatively. And that's the thing, 12% might sound good, but I'd much rather have 18 over that period than 12. And so what I did is I looked at what would happen in 80/20 if you did not invested in the particular funds that were suggested, but just in the sectors, just UK.
Yeah.
Took the average fund, and actually the difference was you would have had 13.99, so you'd have been on 14% return. So you had 12, the average fund manager was getting 12.2, and you would have had 14 based on getting just an average fund, just being in the right place at the right time. But that extra almost 5% from 80/20s come from being in the right fund. And so that is how you boost your investment returns. Is really, this part is allocation, but part of it is actually picking the right thing. So within that group, it doesn't matter if you can be in the UK equity sector, you could pick a UK fund or a US fund or whatever was the sector, but it's about picking the right one in that sector. That was what makes you really outperform. And as a general rule, if you pick a bad performing fund in the best performing sector, you'll probably outperform one of the best performers in the worst sectors, if that makes sense. But to really, really outperform, you've got to pick the top ones. Now, some people might be thinking, well, that's kind of obvious. Of course you want to get the best ones. How do you do it? Now, I did another piece of research where I looked at, I'm always asked, people try and find, what are the funds with the best return over 5 years and 10 years? Why 5 years and 10 years? It's just a nice round numbers, and we often talk about don't invest for any less than 5 years, because you've got to allow for cycles in markets. So I went back and did the numbers, looked at those figures. Now, you may sit there and think there's some well-known names on there. We're not going to go through them, but there's some funds that you think, oh, they're the blockbusters. They've done brilliantly over 5 and 10 years. Now, I, personally, when I looked at the list, would invest in hardly any of them. Yet the financial advisors out there and the people who would generally just invest their own money, they would just rank them on these factors and then think, yeah, they're the ones to go and buy. Now, to prove why I wouldn't, I took the research a little bit further. I found those bits of those fund managers, and then I looked at how those funds performed over a period of time.
Okay, good, yeah.
So what I did is I got all the UK equity funds, analysed their performance for a 10-year period from 2001 to 2011, and then I ranked their performance and I picked the top 10, and these 10 had done really well. There's some big names in there: Invesco Perpetual, Income and High Income. They're names if anybody invests will know. They used to be Neil Woodford's funds. And the reason I did that period, because I then looked at the subsequent 5-year period to today. So I looked at the 10-year figure at that point. So it was almost if, come 2011, what would have happened if I'd then gone, right, I looked at the past 10 years, I'm going to pick those 10, and I put my money in there, and for the next 5 years, because that's kind of what people are doing when they look at those long-term performance figures. And when I then ranked where they appeared in their sectors, they many of them finished in the bottom half. So they went from being the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to being 83rd, 27th, 14th, 62nd, 100th, 84th, 18th, 95th, 115th and 138th out of a sector that only has around about 200 funds. Between that period, it varied how many there were. So what the point of that is that just because they did well at that period for 10 years, it masks the fact, the nuances of different cycles and markets and when they perform and outperform. It's just a window you look at, if that makes sense. It's a function of that period. So that next 5-year period, they didn't do so well. There were a whole bunch of funds that were below them in the previous 10 years that superseded them. So my point is, don't over-focus on that long-term stuff. So if you're not into investing and you're listening to this, that's one thing. It's not all about long-term performance. And to prove that, I once did a piece of research many years ago now for a firm who wanted to try and prove that there was a pattern that if a fund was did that, so it was year on year was in the top performers, then that predicted that it would be the next year would be a top performer. So basically, the fund manager was a legend. That's what it was kind of trying to prove. and I sat down, and I'm really analytical, and like people know I did a maths degree. The way I do this is I just chuck stuff at the wall and see what falls out. I don't try and prove it, and then when I find something that looks like a pattern that will start to emerge, I then try and break it. It's a good tip. If you think you found something, try and break it. And if you keep trying to break it and you can't break and find the exception and break the rule, then that will be enough proof that you probably are right. Rather than what happens is people go and try and prove something, and then they prove it, and then they go right to that, rather than try and change time frames and all sorts of things. And anyway, I proved there was no correlation. And despite the people I worked for wanting there to be, because they were going to provide fund ratings and all that sort of stuff based on this theory, there wasn't a connection. Just because somebody was year on year doing really, really well, that past performance has very little impact on future returns. And again, we touched upon it in a recent podcast. And really the key is the shorter the time frame, the more recent that time frame, that performance, it does then have an impact, which is what feeds into 80-20. Now, as an aside, I did look at something to do with how you pick the best performing fund managers. Someone asked me who are the top 10 fund managers. I said, well, what does that even mean? And because every dog has his day. So the one thing I would say, if you want to get into that game, completely up to you. Don't look at past performance. I use other metrics, like one of them is a Sharpe ratio. It's a figure that you will see quoted every now and then. And it really just measures the amount of return they get for their risk. it's the excess return. That's far better. That's not. Do you know what I mean? It's like saying looking at who's got the fastest lap or something like that. But if somebody's driving recklessly, then they're not going to necessarily win the race, are they? Because they're going to probably crash out on the sort of on the later races. So later laps. That makes sense as an analogy. But that's really
it's a great analogy. I'm loving it.
Yeah.
I love analogies. You're good at analogies. So
I'm making them up on the fly, so I hope sometimes they work. But that's really what it is. So you don't want the guy who's just flying around and doing some crazy stuff on these qualifying laps. It's all about how he does over time and manages all those risks and things that go wrong as well. So Sharpe ratio, that's quite a good one. Anyway, the point is of all this, you want to know how you've got to invest in something where people adapt. And the fund managers who've underperformed this year didn't adapt. They've stuck to their principles. They may be right in the long run, but if they do become right, if you use the idea of more shorter term momentum and stuff like that, which is baked into 80-20, and I talk about the returns as I did earlier, then you've got much more success, more likely to have success in investing. There are other ways of doing it. There are things like value investing and things like that, and you can, this horses for courses, you can mix and match. I'm not saying what I do is the holy grail, but in terms of your time you spend investing, your expected returns, your level of knowledge, all of that, to optimize that, it's the best way that I know how to do it, which is why it's all baked together. On that value investing, I was actually asked on the side, another thing to teach people. Someone asked me, I think markets are really high right now, and so I think they're going to crash. But I would like to invest when they go down, and so when they bounce back, I'm going to make a killing. And they said to me, so how do I invest? Do I invest in recovery funds or special situation funds? I don't know. I know you've done a bit of investing, Andy, but you might see funds that have those names. And the thing I would say, never look at a name, because the names are a marketing department function for those fund houses. So they get the latest trend, and so somebody thinks it's about, we've got to get value or recovery, and they'll chuck those names, those words in the fund name because they know it attracts people. Those funds tend to be value funds, which means they tend to pick funds that are unloved, shares that are unloved or investments that are unloved. So if they're going to bounce back from a market fall, they're not necessarily going to bounce back because they may have been unloved before the market dip. So they're not going to suddenly become loved again. So they're going to be more of a long-term play. As a passing tip, I will say to people, one way to find it, you can rank the table to see what fell the furthest. Okay, performance tables when the market fell. But the other thing is, go and look at something called beta, which is a stat again, and it's a measure of how a fund or an investment, how it performs. Its performance relates to the benchmark it's set against. So let's say it was a benchmark of the FTSE 100 and it was an equity fund. Then if it has a beta of 1, because it's measured up, like it goes up from sort of 0 to 1. And it goes through 1 actually. Yeah. You end up having, if something has a beta of 1, then if the FTSE jumps up 5%, then that fund is going to probably do the same thing. If it has a beta of 1.5, then it will jump up by a multiple of 1.5. So you're looking at something more like 7.5 in that example. So what it really means is, if you want to find a fund that when the market is going to rocket back and bounce up, pick a fund with a high beta. It's like picking a hyperactive child, yeah. So when they're all sitting, when the things go wrong and they're told that they can get, being told to sit still by the teacher, and then they say, right, it's break time, and the bell rings, then you want the one who's the quickest, the most hyperactive, is going to fly out of his seat. That's all that beta is really measuring. So it's kind of, I'm not sure if that's politically correct analogy I've just used. I hope it is, but it's picking that kind of, that twitchy one that's going to go, because when the market fell, that fund would have been the one that got hammered. And so it's a quick way of just going, right, yeah, pick one with a high beta. But equally, you might want to pick funds that don't have high betas, because therefore when the market is all over the place, you might like that kid who sits there and sits in the corner and does what it's told and is predictable. Then you don't necessarily want a high beta. As an aside, something for 80-20 investors, I'm going to do a piece on this. The beta thing is not the be-all and end-all, because it's also can just be a sign you're picking the wrong benchmark. Because if it's not tracking a benchmark at all, then it might mean that it's actually a different benchmark. It's actually being twitchy around, if that makes sense. And that's the one that it can be misleading. So it shouldn't be. The fund managers are meant to pick a reflective benchmark. But anyway, that's something for 80/20 investors to look out for. So I hope people have learnt something there. If you want to boost returns, yes, timing is it's not about timing really. Asset allocation is the beginnings, and it's what to buy. And the way to work it out is not to focus on long-term trends of what fund managers do, because it really is about what's going on in the current investment cycle and who adapts, who's doing well, who's made the right calls. And the way you can do that is looking at that much more short-term, near-term stuff is what 80/20 does. There, we're done.
Beautiful. And what I love about it all is that you are one of the only, if not the only person or people out there that have put your money where your mouth is, and you publish your information and you tell people what you're investing in and how you've done. Often with a lot of these sort of things, they'll post the bits of information they want you to see. You publish everything, which I think is absolutely refreshing, and I don't think there's anybody out there doing it. So well done you. And also congratulations, by the way, on doing that investment piece and managing to crowbar in analogies about racing drivers and badly behaved children. Well done.
Thanks, Andy. I think that's what probably makes our podcast slightly different.
Right, that brings us on nicely to that bit that everyone's been waiting on tenterhooks, the best ever money hack. I'm all ears, and literally I am all ears because I've had my hair cut, so my ears are sticking out at the moment. Anyway,
What the best ever money hack, Andy? It's about, like I went up go shopping and see things, and students get discounts everywhere, don't they?
they do.
And they do, and they get awesome discounts. And I tell you what, I was probably the only student. I wasn't the only student. All the students of my uni rarely got a discount, actually. Because I went to Warwick University. And I don't know if anyone's been to Warwick, but it's like Alcatraz. Once you're on it, you can't get off it. It's kind of on the edge of Coventry, miles from it's nowhere near Warwick, but it's in its own bubble. So basically, the students live, and everything goes on there. Everything they buy, they socialise. So there was none of this, pound a pint job that was going on for most students back in the mid-90s for the rest of the country. They had a captive audience. I was paying £1.80 a pint then, and that's a lot. You think that was 20 years ago in a student discount?
I'd have thought it'd have been about 1 and 8 or something like that. 5 shillings or something like that.
Yeah, so that shows how mentally scarred I am by that. I mean, that sounds awesome, I suppose, compared to these days, the £5 a pint plus you pay in London. Anyway, the tip is you can get an NUS card, the National Union of Students card, that they have to flash to get all these awesome savings. Anyone can get one, technically, without really being a student. And so this is the awesome money hack, because, well, let's just start. It can save you so much money on various different things. Now, the trick is, there's nothing wrong with it. You become a student technically, because what happens, there's a company called eCareers, which do online courses. And they do online, of course, most online courses cost hundreds of pounds, but they do a whole range of courses. And if you do a course with them and enrol, you can apply for a National Union of Students NUS card. And they do courses for as little as £9.99. So there are courses on things like cooking or first aid, things like that are basically not much more than £10. So in essence, you can really pay £10 to get an NUS card. Now, if you don't realise or don't think it's worth having, then there are loads of discounts that students get, like half price Spotify, up to 15% off of Apple products. They get 25% off Odeons, 10% off of things in like lots of high street shops, flights, 10% off Amazon purchases. So you can see that the £10 you might spend on this course is going to save you a fortune. And there's an NUS extra card which costs a little bit of money, not much. I think it's about 17 quid or something. That gives you even more savings. So the ultimate money saving hack, should I say, is to enrol in a course with these people. And this has been a tip that I've seen creeping out around the place and has appeared in one or two money saving blogs, and I think there might have even been a national paper sort of suggesting about it. But you can get an NUS card, and you can legally and quite rightly, because you are a student on an online course, go and claim student discounts. So go knock yourself out. There is no reason why everybody who listens to this podcast shouldn't do it. I don't think there's a question of ethics in there because you're a student.
Okay, quick question then. Have you done it? Will you do it?
I haven't done it, Andy, because the reason I haven't done it is because I only come up with the content for this podcast about 10 minutes before I started it, which gives people an insight into how my life works. Will I do it? Possibly, but I haven't said that. I've actually got to the point where I was so fed up of being a student. I'm not sure I want the label, but...
You said there that there's nothing ethically wrong with it. I feel a little uncomfortable with it. I get it, and power to the people that do it.
I suppose you're right, Andy. I think there is actually something slightly ethically wrong with it. I suppose what my point really was is that there are some quite big hitters out there who are starting to promote doing this, and you are technically a student. But I do get your point. It is.
I get it, and power to the people that do it. I won't look at them any differently. Damien, don't do it. I won't talk to you again. No, good. I enjoyed that. That's good. Maybe I'll get my wife to do it, and then I don't feel so bad, and I still get the savings.
I tell you what, if people listen to this podcast, tweet us money to the masses and say, do you think, is that a bad thing to do? Because you've been able to do it for years, and is it wrong to do that? And then we can take a bit of a barometer of the nation's ethics and whether they actually pretending to be a student is even a thing they want to do.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, we'll provide the results in next week's pod. How about that?
Well, yeah. So make sure you do tweet us, otherwise we're going to be sitting here looking rather stupid. That is it, really, Andy. That is it for this week. There's been plenty in the podcast, so yeah. Good.
I've loved it, as always, and we'll see everyone next week. Do review the podcast. We had a lovely review this week, and basically saying how much they enjoyed it because it was down to earth, and the fact that there's one guy that knows what he's talking about and one guy that doesn't, and that kind of works. So, yeah, power to it. Brilliant. That's kind of where we were going with it right from day one, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't kind of. It was pretty much spot on what we were doing, wasn't it, Andy? And it also helped that we were friends. It said... Do you know what it said? He also said in the review, go and have a look. It said something like, it's like Damien talking to a friend. So we obviously wasn't convincing enough that we are actually friends. You're just a mere acquaintance on a podcast about money, Andy, actually.
Yes, and until next week, acquaintance Damien. And yeah, until next week. Bye.
Bye.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.